welcome to this discussion, introductions to NFTs for investors. We've had a massive response to this session and looking forward to bringing you some content, some valuable knowledge that you can use with your clients as you move forward in your discussions with them. We've got an expert panel today and we're really looking forward to this next hour of discussion. As always with PCD content, we love to hear from our audience, so please do utilize the YouTube chat function, pop your questions in there, and I will be able to see those and bring them live to our panel as we move through. So really looking forward to getting your thoughts, comments, observations on this emerging sector. Nobody has all the answers in this new field at the moment, so we'll do our best to get your questions answered, but please do connect to our panel and I'm sure you can find solutions together. So without further ado, I'd like to invite each of our panelists to provide a little introduction about themselves and their interest in NFTs, starting with Ben Small at GlobalBlock. Welcome, Ben.
Hello, thank you, David. What a great intro that was, by the way. My name's Ben Small. Thank you for joining, everyone. I'm head of partnerships for a wonderful group of people called GlobalBlock. We found a really cool little niche in the market, helping provide a hand-holding, high-touch service to new investors making their baby steps into the digital asset world, or maybe more regular investors that want to take their investing to the next level.
Fantastic. Great to have you with us, Ben. Next up, Fred Clark from Boodle, Hatfield. Welcome, Fred.
Thanks, David. Hi, everyone. I'm a solicitor at Boodle, Hatfield. We're a modern private client law firm, currently in our 300th year. And I specialise in corporate and commercial law, focusing on the art and luxury asset marketplace. I have been advising in the NFT space on commercial considerations when setting up and the contractual terms that can go along with various sort of actors in the space.
Wonderful to have you with us, Fred. Next up, Lizzie Williams from Harbottle & Lewis. Welcome, Lizzie.
Hi there, I'm a solicitor advocate and senior associate at Harbottle & Lewis, which is also a law firm specialising in the private client and media and entertainment space. I do dispute resolution work generally, and I've come across a few disputes in the NFT space and also advising people on preemptive action they can take to try and avoid getting into disputes, both on the sell side and on the investment side.
Well, terrific. And last but not least, Siobhan Moret from Saffery, Champness in Geneva. Welcome, Siobhan.
Hi. So I'm working as a marketing director in Saffery, Champness. In addition, I'm also dealing with clients side. So I'm looking after particularly clients who are dealing with digital assets. So I'm welcoming those new kinds of clients to the firm, dealing with their trust structures and succession planning. I'm also a founder or a founding member of a Web3 organisation, a not-for-profit organisation that deals with Web3 for environmental good. So we put on educational summits and also have specific projects dealing with Web3 and seeing how we can leverage those communities for good throughout the world.
Terrific. I mean, do follow all of our panelists on social media, but Siobhan on Crypto Chamonix and other things that this audience might be interested in, really encourage you to look her up afterwards and follow up. So we're going to structure the course of this next 60 minutes by going through that investment journey. We're going to start off by helping the process of investors understanding what they're buying, and we're targeting this discussion around advisors who might be working with clients who need those little tips that are going to help them keep their clients on the right track. We're also going to talk about valuation, what drives valuation in this sector. And as Lizzie highlighted, there's lots of risks and potential for dispute. So we're also going to cover how investors can protect themselves. We're going to wrap up the discussion with more of a blue sky thinking approach, where we just discuss, where could this NFT space go? What are some of the ideas that the panel have seen being implemented, and to get us a little bit excited about the possibilities in the future. So just kicking off though, on this point about understanding what you're buying. Fred, I mean, a lot of the work that you've been doing on NFTs has grown out of your practice around the art market. Perhaps you could give us a sense of the steps investors might take, looking at provenance, looking at some of the common steps of due diligence that they might take before looking at investing in a particular NFT.
Yeah, so To be able to invest in an NFT, you need to hold some cryptocurrency. NFTs themselves are assets on a decentralized ledger. So there's various different examples out there that are being used. So Ethereum, Tezos, Binance, these are kind of the main blockchains. And then I suppose the first thing you need to do is try and select something which you think has got some value. And there's lots of questions to answer there. But as you say, you mentioned provenance. And there's lots of examples that I've come across where you sort of need to try and understand a bit about the background to the creation of the NFT and why it is that there is some kind of value. So, for example, there was a case recently where the granddaughter of Picasso and her son were planning to sell a load of NFTs relating to work in their own personal collection, almost branding it as part of the administration of Picasso's estate. But the estate got wind of this and sought to shut it down. So in the end, if you were to purchase one of their NFTs, you're only buying a sort of personal creation of two of the Picasso heirs. So in the long run, you might question whether that has the same value as if it were an actual genuine NFT created by his estate. So that's just a perfect example of, what is the provenance, and is there a good title from the artist, or in this case, the artist's estate.
Okay, thanks. And Lizzie, what's your perspective on this, the provenance and the common steps you might go through with an investor looking at something which might be a high value asset that they want to get right?
Yeah, I think a lot of the general principles that we apply when investing and buying things apply equally in this space. Doing your due diligence, who is selling it to you? Is it a reputable auction house that's been around for hundreds of years, or is it an online entity where there's very little information available? There's an element of common sense in doing the classic due diligence, but obviously because it's an online space, and depending on your knowledge as an investor, you may not fully understand the details of the token, the NFT, the code, what you're buying. There's an extra level of advice to be sought and consideration to be had about the integrity of the token, and whether it's going to be transferable and do everything that you want it to do. So it's classic due diligence, but then up to level, I would say.
And it's different if you're buying a newly minted token versus something on a secondary market. Do you take a different approach there?
I mean, I would say, sort of drawing on what Fred said, there's an element of, if you buy from the person who's clearly got the rights to do what they want with the underlying asset, whether that's the estate of Picasso or somebody else, there's probably less likely to be issues around infringement of intellectual property and that kind of thing. So yes, I think if you've got if you're buying from somebody that's clearly the creator, then I think that's potentially a better starting point. But having said that, there's lots of NFTs that are resold, and that's completely fine. But you've got to just make sure that the chain of title, which Fred referenced, is clear, and that you are actually getting what you think you're getting.
And the online marketplaces where these tokens are bought, is it very easy to verify what is legitimate and known and what isn't? It's a sophisticated market of buyers generally going for these type of tokens. Is that, or is it less obvious actually which marketplaces are most reputable and which aren't? Is there a divergence and enough knowledge out there to work out which is which?
I could see Ben sort of smiling. I'm not sure. I feel like he's got a view on that. But from my perspective, I think it is still quite difficult as somebody that isn't in the depths of the space and doesn't have the detailed tech knowledge to know what they're buying. I'm not sure there is enough information out there, and I can see why people would gravitate towards a traditional auction house that's done its own due diligence if they're in any doubt.
Thanks, Ben. Do you have a view on the marketplace there?
No, that's right. I mean, typically, if you're new to it, you're going to go to providers that you know and you've used in the past. That isn't quite so evident with NFTs. Obviously, the big marketplace that's dominated the market so far is OpenSea, because of their lazy minting process. It makes it a lot easier for people to start selling their creations and embrace that creator economy. A couple of things you can do just to double check though before you go onto a marketplace you're not familiar with. Research the team a little bit more. We talk a lot about projects that have been doxed, so whether the identity of the people behind the projects has been made clear, you know exactly who you're dealing with. Maybe you can ask around in your community, have you heard of this person before? Have they done other projects? And can we take the risk with them? The one big pitfall, I suppose, is when you're looking for social proof. I think I see a lot of people falling for going on community numbers. So how many people have actually bought into projects? Looking at that and thinking, wow, well, if 100,000 people are looking at this, then this can't go wrong. And actually, that's often where the big mistakes are made.
Fred, just to bring you back in on that point.
Yeah, just following on from what Ben said, I've got a perfect anecdote really of exactly that. So a while ago, I was sort of exploring the various different marketplaces, and I was looking at artists I was interested in who had produced NFTs, and there was one street artist called Mr. Doodle, you may or may not know, that produced these fantastic squiggles. And I saw on his social media that he had released a sort of selection of NFTs on Super Rare. I was on OpenSea, and as Ben said, it's very easy to mint NFTs there. And there was an exact replica page with Mr. Doodle with all of the information dragged across from the Super Rare account and about 20 NFTs of his artwork. So, and I just thought this looks completely wrong. I contacted Mr. Doodle's representatives by email and got a reply a sort of few hours later saying, yeah, completely, thanks for flagging that, and we'll get it taken down from OpenSea. I don't know whether anyone actually purchased any of these sort of counterfeit artworks, but if they had, I would imagine they would find it very difficult to get their cryptocurrency back. And it's a perfect example of how intellectual property laws and sort of counterfeiting is rife. And so, as Ben said, you need to don't just sort of assume that if lots of people have bought them and you can see transactions that have happened, that they are genuine. You need to do a bit more digging, and you can do that in a technical way as well. You can actually trace back transactions through the blockchain, and if you can do that yourself, great. But if not, you can always get external help to sort of check, particularly if it's high value, that it does come from the original source.
And as Lizzie mentioned, the auction houses are active in this space, particularly from the art market. That must give people comfort, mustn't it? If they're, or do you find that because they're doing their own due diligence and have reputations at stake? What's your read on that? Is only a fraction of the overall market, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's very exciting. The auction houses have moved incredibly quickly to get into this space. They're not fallible. So even if you were to buy a traditional artwork from an auction house, you might find that it's subject to a title dispute, for example, or that there's some underlying condition issue that you didn't realize before you bought it. So I would just always say it's buyer beware. And there is actually an example of a case against Sotheby's that's ongoing, where sort of an artist sold an artwork, and it's sort of questionable whether they actually have the title to sell it. So I think that particular NFT sold for about $1.5 million, and it's now going through the courts in New York. So great that they're in the space, and I think you can trust them to do a bit of research, but it's certainly not foolproof.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that perspective. And Ben, as Fred mentioned on the top, clients need crypto in order to, it's a crypto environment in which these assets are purchased. Are you finding that, clients are coming to you, getting assets on a crypto platform, then making these kind of purchases? Is it very, common interaction between yourselves and someone there?
That's right. Great question. I mean, the reality is, before NFTs, actually, people were so much the market size from our perspective was a lot smaller. But because NFTs and the types we see currently, arts and the basic use of NFT anyway, can attract a different type of person who maybe isn't interested in making financial gains in ICOs and speculating on the price of Bitcoin. It's sort of, yes, I want to invest in this piece of digital art. And people have come to us because it can be quite daunting opening up a wallet somewhere and going through learning all these new technical terms. When actually, if you've got someone who knows it, walked that path hundreds of times, we can get someone in a position where they can buy some digital art very quickly.
Thank you. And Siobhan, just to bring you in, I mean, as a trustee with clients perhaps looking at NFTs, this provenance point is extremely important. What was your take on this whole area?
Yeah, I mean, the type of clients that we would see that are bringing NFTs into kind of a trust environment, who would be more, we're looking at high net worth individuals who are probably next generation, who are committing a portion, or it's almost like a bit of play assets, I guess. But in some cases, with the types of clients we're dealing with, that could be quite a significant amount of money, actually. And the provenance is really, really interesting because basically no one has done it. We're seeing anyway, very, very few of the clients that we see. We have recently taken on a high net worth individual who had quite a substantial NFT collection, and actually requires going through each of the contracts and obviously appointing the right legal advisor who knows what they are doing in the space, and going through the contracts and really understanding, because this client had never really looked at it themselves. They just bought a bunch of NFTs because they enjoyed it and liked it, and they had the money to do it. And so for us as a trustee, bringing that onto trust, we obviously need to do the due diligence at that point if it hasn't been done. So it's to find the right advisor, and then you have your custody issues. Again, like you mentioned, many of the trading platforms are not licensed at all, so that's a bit tricky for us as trustees. But in terms of just custodying, then you need to find solutions which are regulated solutions, at least, that you are custodying them with a third party, if they're not on a cold wallet somewhere.
Okay.
So working with the right partners is important.
Thank you. And it's an interesting point you made about it's a different type of client. It's perhaps a younger client, more of a next gen client. Yeah. I mean, Lizzie, is this something that you see as or do you see more traditional investors who would normally have been buying real estate and private companies also dabbling in this area, or can the investor base be characterized in any way as younger and more tech savvy, or is that a complete approximation?
I think from my perspective so far, it has generally been people that are younger and tech savvy, or people who have established more traditional tech businesses and see this is aligned with what they've done previously to some extent, and therefore more comfortable with it.
And are you also seeing business ideas being spawned off this whole area of NFTs, and then those raising investment? So, utilizing the technology, and that's their next sort of value creation. I know at Harbottles you do a lot of this, of the media style work. Is that something you've seen coming through, people with real entrepreneurial ideas around the space?
Yes, absolutely. So things like film financing, is approximation to crowdfunding, but now we're saying, well, if you want to invest and create this bit of content, you can buy into that, and that's quite an interesting from an investor's perspective. So yeah, it's absolutely broadening out. It's not only just simple as buying a piece of art, but it's got multiple different ways that an investor can get involved in quite an exciting project that's more complex than just an NFT,
fascinating.
A digital asset.
Siobhan, are you seeing something similar? This is spawning a new wave of enterprise that we're just at the tip of. We're really not got going very much into this whole field, I don't think, in general.
We're literally building the boats. Yeah. We've literally not got there yet. We're not even on the water. I'm seeing lots of stuff, actually, because of the Web3 conferences that we're putting on, and the next one we're doing in December is specifically NFT orientated. I've been researching a lot and speaking to a lot of founders of different companies who are using NFTs in very interesting, unusual ways. For example, recently I came across a furniture company who are building very beautiful bespoke furniture. And apart from the usual NFT that you buy to say that, you're the single owner of this unique piece of furniture, actually what they've done is they are raising funds not to put in their business like you would do as normal, but actually what they're going to do is sell NFTs of the concepts they're producing. So they're producing, say, 70 furniture concepts. You can buy the NFT. As an individual, you're motivated to kind of share and promote that particular furniture concept because you receive a commission every time they sell one. So, it's like a great idea. I don't know how it will go. I'm sure that's going to be something we're going to see much more in the future. Those kind of people using very interesting ways of raising cash, basically using NFTs. And the other thing, I've seen is as well, our Chamonix Crypto is very environmentally focused. So we're talking about leveraging Web3 for environmental good. So we've seen organizations such as Ocean Drop, for example, who are using NFTs to raise money for environmental goods. So, this is an organization which is something we are also going to do ourselves, but they have partnered with a bunch of different artists, and each producing something original, auctioned them off. So it's a bit more of a traditional idea, but auctioned it off and raised, I think they raised something like $130,000 with like 12 different artworks, which were all digital NFTs.
I mean, Fred, just to bring you back in, I mean, are you seeing these different applications, the spirit of enterprise, but perhaps for a younger, more tech-savvy client base, but that is also interested in philanthropy and other things? Are you seeing that coming through with the sort of creative ideas that are available in this space? Is endless possibilities?
Yeah, absolutely. And within our charities team, there's definitely been conversations going on lately about decentralized autonomous organizations and whether you could use one of those to deal with the governance of a charity. So I think that's exactly what Siobhan is sort of getting at. And there are examples out there where considerable amounts of money, for example, have been raised by selling an NFT to fund a DAO. So that there's the Ukraine DAO, for example, that sold an NFT and almost raised $7 million for Ukraine at this current time, which is clearly a massive benefit of these new structures. And I think there's definitely a patchwork in the world at the moment as to how these how they're treated globally, but it does seem to be moving in the direction of it's a new form of philanthropy, for example, or running a charity that's very interesting.
Okay, thank you. Do get your questions and comments in. I'll bring them live to the panelists as we move through. Siobhan, just coming back to you. Sorry.
Yeah. Just to build on what Fred just said, we're seeing a lot in regenerative crypto economics. So basically taking Web3 technology and giving it back to the people. So, you get like another example of what Fred was talking about. I came across a founder recently who had a very successful game. And what he did with that game, everyone was paying a weekly or monthly, whatever, subscription. And what he did is he turned it into a DAO, and then he gave that money back to the community and said, how do you want to spend it? So we're seeing a lot of this kind of giving back to the public for the greater good. There's some great podcasts on this topic. Green Pill would be one I would recommend, which it really discusses in very much in detail the innovations around this area.
Okay, great. So just to move on then, just to look at the area of valuation. In any asset class, there's always, in many sort of private asset classes, there is a difference of opinion around valuation, subjective. But in this space, perhaps, Lizzie, could you give us an insight as to how someone might value an NFT? What gives it its value? How do you start building that up on a rational basis?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously part of what attracts people to NFTs is this idea of uniqueness. And that's something that comes inherently from the way that the smart contract code is formed. But actually, it's not necessarily the case that what it links to is not a counterfeit or a copy. So that doesn't guarantee you're getting something unique in terms of the asset. So there's a bit of understanding that. But assuming what you're getting is unique, which is the whole idea of this, and that you've verified that, then obviously the rarer something is, the more valuable it is generally. So the whole uniqueness aspect creates value. So there may be an overarching project or design, and it may be divided up into little parts, and you give an NFT for each one, and you're part of something special and unique. And it's connecting investors with an idea that they're interested in a way where they feel there aren't intermediaries, and they are more invested, more close to what's going on, more engaged. They get special benefits from that relationship in a way they don't when just ordinarily making an investment. So that connection that it builds, which I think means that people feel value. In terms of stepping back and putting a market value on things as opposed to personal interest in something, that's obviously quite difficult. If there are NFTs on the market for a while, they may have a more stable price than those, where they're going onto the market for the first time, when you are taking much more of a gamble, and you're saying, is this something which is going to take off? do I think, and go up in value or not? And that's obviously, at the initial stage, harder to assess. So obviously,
it's like buying into an IPO, I guess, at the start is there's a price there that you're going to start trading on the market, and you can look at that individually and say, yeah, I believe in that price.
Yeah, and there's risk at every stage, but if you're buying at the beginning, then it's harder to assess what the rest of the market is going to think, I think, at that stage. Whereas if something's been traded a few times, you've got more of a sense of that.
Okay, thanks. Ben, nodding away there on this whole meaty topic of valuation, what's your view? And I imagine you've seen some tokens valued in slightly crazy fashion over the short period we've been looking at this area.
Yeah, although to caveat that, David, I mean, I've sort of shook my head at things thinking that they're overpriced, and yet it's gone through the roof and I've looked very silly.
Yeah.
So, and I'm sure that's going to keep on happening. I think I agree with everything Lizzie said there, and I suppose the extra layer that we heard throughout the whole of this winter has been the buzzword of utility. And Siobhan mentioned a great example of good utility, I think, the furniture company there. Something that I worry might have an impact on valuations in the longer run are, well, the promise of being added to a community via an NFT that you've purchased, where the utility offerings attached to it may not be as sustainable as one might think at the start. So, getting access to particular clubs or being able to attend very exclusive events over a period of time. Well, how do we know that these events are going to exist this time next year? All these things, I think, sounded great over the winter. But more and more, I'm seeing the community smarten up to it a little bit. So it's just something to read between the lines before clicking the go button, I'd say.
Thanks a lot. There's a question in the chat from Mona Doshi from Anjuman Ankala down in Nairobi. Thank you, Mona, for this question. It's just asking, with the UK court recognising NFTs as property in a recent landmark case, should this give more comfort to investors? Perhaps Fred or Lizzie? Fred, do you have a view on that?
So this case is absolutely fascinating. So a case against OpenSea, and the owner lost 2 of her NFTs. The wallet was hacked. Her name's Lavinia Osborne, who's very big in the sort of Web3 space, and they were able to trace the NFTs into different wallets using an expert that came along and looked at this and got an injunction against persons unknown until such time that they can determine who owns these wallets. But the main upshot was that NFTs were recognised in the UK as property. That certainly should give you comfort if you're buying NFTs for a number of reasons. One of which is if it's property, you should be able to insure it. So this is something that the insurance market will look at. And one of the main risks of owning cryptocurrency or NFTs is hacking, and this may now pave the way to insure that risk. So definitely helps.
Okay, thanks. And Siobhan, on the trustee side, these kind of court rulings recognising NFTs as property must certainly help with you onboarding the right assets, but also, as Fred was saying, around insurance. What's your take on this in terms of taking some comfort for investors out of recognition in law?
Well, I think actually more it's comfort for trustees.
Yeah.
Because I recently went to the STEP Alpine conference, actually, which was, all the great and the good of the estate planning world is there. And I was shocked, actually. I don't know why, but I was a bit surprised to see the kind of the references made to crypto in a very kind of disparaging way and a very dismissive way by the community at large. And I think that part of the issues is, first of all, there's a lack of understanding and a lack of trustees who have done the work to understand. And secondly, of course, there's lots of misconceptions, and one of these being the risk element. And of course, yes, it's a very volatile asset, but at the end of the day, as trustees, what do is we look after assets. It's not the first time we've had an exotic asset class in any trust. I know that there are cases where people have held pages of the Bible, for example. There's been some quite unusual types of assets that trustees have looked after. for their beneficiaries. And so I really think that these kinds of rulings do help to build a case, because of course there is risk. We don't have, a huge history of valuation of NFTs or cryptocurrency to refer to, and if you look at like back at tech companies, we have the same issue there, don't we? Amazon, it was wildly swinging up and down in terms of its value. So now it's considered to be a good bet, now it's a good investment. Okay, maybe not in the last couple of weeks, but it's a good investment. And the issue is time on our hands. We don't have that history. So yes, I do think that these kinds of cases are very, very helpful. However, I do also think that trustees need to pull their finger out and actually just have a look at the asset class and really get to understand it, rip it apart, understand what's inside it, understand what the real risks are, instead of relying on misconceptions about headlines that are bandied around in the press to make their decisions for them. So I'm sorry, I feel strongly about this.
Yeah, I think very valid. I mean, Lizzie, are you seeing more trustees looking at these assets, and are you working with them to help them understand their position and how they can get this right legally? Is that coming to the fore more frequently?
It is. We're increasingly being asked about that and precisely that question, really. How do we as trustees protect ourselves if this is something we're considering? How do we structure things? We're being asked to produce things like handbooks for trustees, explaining how things work, what the risks are, what the remedies are, how to safeguard the asset, protect it, and ensure that it's secure, all of that kind of thing. So there's certainly a big area of advice going on legally, where you are advising trustees on how to implement these things in a way that protects them and protects the asset. Absolutely, yeah.
Because it's perfectly possible for the trustees with the right advice to actually hold these assets. It's just a case of, as Siobhan says, doing the work, get your head around it, and there's a massive opportunity there.
We're doing it already.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it's not going away. This is not like, it's not going away. So get with it. It's time.
Terrific. And Ben, I mean, off the back of this ruling, I guess it opens up other conversations, like around financing, around lending. I mean, you can get lending against crypto at the moment. I've seen different providers offering that. Do you see lending against NFTs? And if valuations go high, how do
Sure,
what's the market like? What's the liquidity like?
I mean, if we had spoken about lending off crypto, 2-3 years ago, people would have laughed at you then. So why wouldn't it be possible for NFTs? The thing is, one message to absolutely bang home, truly, regardless of how volatile crypto is or the NFT space is, the underlying technology is absolutely sound, and that's not going away. So with that in mind, when risk appetite changes amongst banks and finance providers, I can absolutely see it being a viable option.
Thank you. And just a question from Nick Hockley, just saying, any recommended reading for people, professionals trying to get up the curve on this? Are there any, I mean, Siobhan, is there any sort of good people to follow, to read up on, any resources that you rely on? I mean, we can circulate some of this.
I think all of the individuals here are writing, so you could probably connect in with everyone in here. I know Ben does an awful lot of blog posts, etc. We're, certainly from our part on the crypto, on the trustee side, we are producing content. So please feel free to hook up with me and on LinkedIn and follow me. Google's your best friend, but make sure you back it up with a bit of someone who's actually really qualified in the field to qualify what you've read.
Thank you. A question here from Catherine Haggy, just asking about insurance and availability of insurance, particularly within structures, but also personally held. I mean, Fred, do you find that there's, for example, in the Lloyd's market, there's specialist suppliers who are brokers who are dealing with this asset class quite frequently?
Yeah, definitely. It sort of sits within the class of in-specie insurance. So I think most of the large insurers have now set up divisions that are focusing on these assets and have been very involved in cyber for some time, cyber risk. Organizations can insure against the threat of hackers. So as I mentioned, the new case law confirms, I think, what everyone already knew, that these are unique assets that are capable of protection and should be afforded the same rights as physical property.
Siobhan, I mean, as as someone who's managing structures with these assets and who will be needing to buy insurance and things like that, have you found that to be readily available through expert firms?
For sure, yeah, absolutely. You just need to do a bit of research. I mean, we've been looking at, and the other thing is like, you know, if you're a professional in a professional context and you're looking to deal with crypto assets, you need to first of all look at your PI insurance. You need to see what's defined in there. You need to see where your gaps are, and like Lizzie said, you know, they can help. You've got professional firms who can help you with that. Insurance is absolutely a good idea, and you maybe want to suggest to your clients in some ways, if they have a particular NFT collection or they would like to take out some extra insurances, that you can look at those. They do exist. It's a developing area in terms of what's covered. You know, that is day by day changing as it becomes much more of a mainstream asset.
Okay, thanks.
Not there yet, though. Not there yet, I would say.
Great, thank you. And just moving on to some of these sort of risk factors, which we've touched on already, but just to go into a little bit more detail. As Siobhan mentioned before, custody and also source of funds, these are two big topics. I mean, Ben, on the custody side, what are some of the key issues? How can people help navigate, understand this space a little bit?
I mean, we said earlier that the main risk really is user error and getting involved with the wrong projects as opposed to getting hacked, because the technology is good, right? As long as you protect the codes, normally you'll be okay. But custody's always been a big issue with crypto. I mean, we all know that poor bloke in Wales is still digging up holes for his laptop somewhere to recover his Bitcoin, and you don't want to be that guy, really. So, and the same applies to NFTs, that the space is gradually catching up. You can, I believe, start looking at having multiple signatures on wallets that are storing in NFTs, but you know, it's nowhere near as developed as for traditional cryptos. And that will also have an impact on the level of insurance you're taking out too. What we've seen, and this can't stress how important this is, it's definitely worth checking with your bank manager or whatever, if you're taking out big investments, to make sure they're happy to take payment or receive funds from these big marketplaces, particularly the ones that don't do any of the due diligence or KYC. Because unfortunately, when you're investing with OpenSea, for example, you have no idea who your funds are mixed with.
So the proceeds coming out when you think you've made these gains, it's paper gains until you get the cash, and you might have struggles to do that.
Absolutely right.
Very interesting. A question, a supplementary question from Mona Doshi. Thank you again for this question, Mona. Just asking, if a family don't know a person owned an NFT, would it be lost if the person dies? How would they protect against that? I mean, Lizzie, we're getting on to more succession planning type topics. What would your take be on this if the broader family don't know about the existence of an NFT?
Oh, it's incredibly difficult. I mean, there's the legal position and there's the practical position. You know, if you don't know it exists and you don't have the code, you're going to be that guy with digging up his garden again with the laptop. So, I mean, some of the things we see in terms of letters of wishes and wills and things like that, we are talking about providing how we keep the passwords and the practicalities of that. And you just have to drill down into it and anticipate it. But certainly if you die without informing anybody that you've got it, I think it's highly unlikely that anybody's going to realise and manage to get hold of it. So it's about making sure that you make provision in advance if it's something that you do want to be passed down and want other people to be able to access.
I mean, Siobhan, this must be one of the major reasons why people look at the trust structuring for these potentially valuable assets over the long term, so that they can be properly managed and passed on.
It's a bit fear. I mean, there's been some very dramatic and well publicized cases of people who have lost wallets which are now worth billions, and so that is something that is definitely on the minds of NFT or sorry, in general, digital asset investors. It's funny because clients do come to us, and there's a variety of different reasons for why they might be looking at a trust structure. I wouldn't say that fear is one of them. Succession, because we're dealing with a younger type of client, I think the succession element probably isn't top of their mind. They're like, well, that's miles away kind of thing. But you never know what's going to happen tomorrow. You don't know. And if you don't put those, if you are worth significantly, you will have got significant wealth in digital assets, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So it is definitely a really important factor to consider, and how to pass on those assets. Albeit, maybe not a trust structure is the most appropriate thing for you, but certainly it needs to be mentioned in your will if it's not.
I mean, Freddie, you're primarily a corporate lawyer, but are you finding that you're working more closely with private client lawyers who are looking at estate plans, and these kind of assets are coming more on the agenda for structuring and part of the conversation so that value doesn't get lost?
Yeah, definitely. So within our sort of crypto asset group, we that is split up between sort of litigation, private client lawyers, and sort of corporate lawyers like myself. And we're hearing a lot from trustees in various jurisdictions seeking guidance on setting up different structures. Maybe they're having clients who have generated a large pot of cryptocurrency and maybe got in the market early, or in some cases setting up structures holding NFTs. And at the moment, the world is vying for this market, which is predicted to be, I think, a $3 trillion market in the future. So you've got all different financial centers who are going through looking at their regulations at the moment, some of which are much further ahead than others. So the US and the EU and the UK are still very much looking at what they want to do. Other perhaps smaller jurisdictions are already well ahead and developing centers. So it'll be very interesting to see how this sort of pans out over the next few years.
Siobhan, I mean, what's your read on the jurisdictions that are leading the charge? I mean, I know within your group, you've got a Cayman office, which is hugely active in crypto generally, in the digital asset space. But who is it that you observe is really, making waves?
Good way. I mean, I think of you mentioned, Fred, there was some smaller jurisdictions, and maybe those are the ones that are like more kind of third world, or at least not as developed, developing nations that have really grasped crypto as as much of a marketing tool as anything else, and made them very inviting places for people who are dealing in that. And when it comes down to jurisdictions that we work with as trustees, I would say Cayman for sure would be high up on the list because they have a very robust legal system anyway that we're all very familiar with. And also have paid special attention to their VASP, which is their, virtual assets legislation. Of course, I'm going to say Switzerland because I'm here. And so, I mean, Switzerland, by just its very design, is naturally inclined towards a decentralized type of system. Our own government is quite decentralized in Switzerland, so there's not one person holding all the power. There's a group of people who make the decisions. So it has actually been very forward thinking, and we have our own crypto valley in Zug, which deals with a lot of nascent companies who are active in Web3. So I would say Switzerland is very understanding. We have got banking licenses now to 3 or 4 different banking institutions. It's still not easy, I would say, to be banked as someone who is a crypto native client, but that's definitely changing. And for sure, Switzerland is leading the charge there, I would say.
Thanks. And I mean, Fred, are you seeing investors also investing in fund structures that have crypto or NFT strategies? So they want some exposure. They acknowledge that this is a rising asset class, but want some diversification. Do you see more of this activity going on? So people might go direct, but also they might just put the faith in a fund manager to be buying the right kind of assets.
Yeah, I think it's going on, but it is definitely at the sort of higher risk side of investing. I think I've seen examples of large US private equity funds that are looking at this space. The big movers and shakers like Bored Ape Yacht Club, they are investing in other NFT platforms. So there's definitely an ecosystem that's developing. But as I say, I don't think it's that mainstream yet, being able to invest in the NFT marketplace.
Sure. Question in, I can't read the name, but from Robo 624. Just question I'm going to put to the panel. As an NFT is recorded against a blockchain, as a record of what happened. If what would happen if the platform was hacked from future fraudsters? Would an NFT's uniqueness be at risk if the NFT record was adjusted? Now, I'm not a technology expert, but I don't know whether there's any view on the panel as to how robust, the records are here. Would this have any impact? Is this question valid, or can it be easily dispatched? Fred, I mean, do you have a view on how robust, I guess, the technology is around this as a protection for investors?
Yeah, well, I think that, provided you're using an established blockchain which is decentralized, I don't think there's much of a risk of the blockchain itself being hacked, because the whole point is that it's supposed to be an indelible ledger, so you can't go back and change things. One of the areas where there is a risk is where there's something in a token that's on a separate platform. So you quite often see, because it's can create very, very high gas fees to include lots of content in an NFT, there's often a link to another URL with for example, an image of the artwork or something like that. And it's those websites that if they were to stop being hosted, you might then just lose what it is that your NFT represents. And so I think that goes back to the due diligence side, is to try and work out what it is you're getting, where are the terms that are associated with it, and what is the asset, and how is that hosted, and is that on the blockchain? Sometimes the token itself is separate from the asset. Thank you for that.
I mean, Ben, on the technology side, do you see risks, or is this, as Fred was saying, if you're on the right blockchain technology, it's established protocols?
That's right. I mean, it's really worth, before investing any kind of digital asset, it's worth trying to spend a bit of time understanding distributed ledger technology. And if you're using providers that really buy into that, then there's not much risk of your purchases being compromised at all.
What about on the side of wallet theft, data fraud, things like that? So not really is the blockchain going to be changed to affect your asset, but more broadly looking at where risks lie in terms of these. What do you see there? Is that actually not very common instance, or?
It would take extremely sophisticated kit to be able to break into and steal from wallets directly. This is on it, and actually the community has been very good to make sure people are refunded as a result. And they've been working to tighten these things up as much as possible. Where the risks really lies, the lack of conscientiousness at the top from the users. So if you think you're clicking through to a marketplace and then suddenly they're asking for your seed phases, and you're giving away confidential data because you're keen on buying a particular NFT, then you're in trouble. It's people taking images and copying and pasting them across and making it look legit when actually it isn't. That's mostly where lots of not even hacks, right? It's just scamming.
Yeah. It's just good, sensible housekeeping that will keep you away from these risks. I mean, Lizzie, just looking at the area of disputes, I mean, we mentioned at the top lots of potential for areas that, where people could go wrong. If people are going to try and preempt some of these areas of disputes, give us a flavor of some of the things that people should be thinking about.
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the key areas that there are disputes and there's, the NFTs being taken down from OpenSea is, for example, the intellectual property issues. So it's making sure the person that you're buying from has the rights to give you whatever rights they're giving you. And therefore, they aren't going to get a complaint from a third party who's going to say, well, actually, they weren't entitled to give you that. And then the NFT is taken down, and then you're wondering what you've actually bought and what you're actually going to have access to, etc. So there's the IP due diligence point, and there's making sure you understand what you're buying. We touched on earlier the fact that you're probably not going to be getting the full copyright and legal ownership of every aspect of the asset. You'll be probably getting a license to use it for personal purposes in a lot of cases. So making sure you fully understand what you're buying, so that, again, there's no nasty surprises and that there hasn't been a misrepresentation to you as to what you're actually getting. And then obviously, there is the small risk of hacking, but as we've touched on, actually, that's a relatively small risk. And sometimes there's protection offered by you having an offline wallet as opposed to an online wallet, things like that. So there are still decisions to be made in that area. But I'd say those are probably the main points to have in mind in terms of avoiding an issue. It's being contractually sound and making sure the IP position is clear so that there are no nasty surprises later.
Okay, thanks. And Fred, you mentioned in our planning call the litigation tracker, the number of disputes and bits of news that flow through to you on a very frequent basis in this area. So that's, give us a flavour of some of that.
Yeah, definitely. So as Lizzie said, the majority of the disputes out there are IP disputes. So you've got Nike suing an online trainer retailer that created NFTs that are of trainers that are stored away in storage, but you can change your NFT for a sneaker. You've got Hermes suing someone that created a sort of series of 100 Meta Birkins that were sort of artistic interpretations that were quite critical of the materials used in Birkin handbags, which are often sort of animal skins and so on. They received a cease and desist letter. Back in the early days of NFTs, CryptoPunks, who are now one of the sort of the most high value NFTs, their first version of their smart contract actually contained an error. So if you were buying one of their NFTs, you were actually able to buy it and request the money back. There's still a number of version 1 CryptoPunks out there. They updated their smart contract and produced version 2, and I believe there's a dispute going on with OpenSea at the moment in relation to whether or not CryptoPunk can remove all of the version 1 NFTs. So plenty to think about. Aside from IP, I think the terms of the contract is definitely one of the main areas where we're seeing possible disputes and real disputes. There's a sort of well-established art collector in the UK called Amir Soleimani, and he's suing Nifty Gateway at the moment. He lost in an auction to buy a Beeple artwork that was actually acquired by someone else for the equivalent of $1.2 million. And he suddenly found out that he was having to buy an edition that the next sort of 100 bidders would have to buy, and that was $600,000. And his case is being brought in the UK and in the US, and he's claiming that Nifty Gateway changed the terms of the auction after he signed up, and so he's saying he did not agree to purchase this. And in the meantime, I think he's got 100 NFTs that have been frozen on Nifty Gateway. So exactly, we are keeping a track of all the disputes going on because it's fascinating, and we're also seeing new law come out of these cases with the Osborne and OpenSea case recently, which we've touched on already, that determined NFTs are property. That was only, I think, in February. So it's a fascinating and fast-moving area, and I think there's definitely going to be lots more disputes out there, and that I think anyone watching, court cases and that sort of thing just finds this a fascinating area. So I'm not saying I'm hoping for more disputes, but I think there will be lots more.
It shows the value of advice, doesn't it? I mean, you can't take away every risk, but you can certainly prepare yourself, and I think that's coming across loud and clear. Then on the fee front, I mean, in traditional financial services, people are very conscious of layers of fees between transactions. Is it more transparent, this area? People more clear what they're paying fee-wise, or is it still a murky old world? What's your read on
the structure and the way the fees are set is quite clear, but unfortunately it's very, very hard to anticipate. So when you talk about fees and NFTs, it's gas fees essentially, and that's calculated by the number of people trying to engage in the marketplace. And if a particular project or lots of projects have drawn a lot of attention all at once, well, you could be paying an awful lot more in fees than you initially planned, right? So there's that side, and then the places where you're buying the initial crypto from in the first place, that can be a bit like negotiating in Moroccan souks when you take everything into account. So it's worth spending a little bit of time having a few chats with people.
Yeah,
to sort of see how you can get ahead of the curve there. Yeah.
Great. And we're just approaching the end of this hour. Still time for a question if you want to put one in the chat, and we will get that answered before the end of the hour. But really just wanted to spend the last... there is a question here from Renata, Renata Reed, just asking, what are some of the best purchases you've seen in the NFT space? For a new investor, is there a safe place to start? Ben, perhaps... you mentioned before you've seen some tokens that actually you were skeptical of that have gone well. I mean, obviously any investor looking at this space needs to do it with a cool head, but what have you observed of this market so far in terms of big wins?
Sure. Well, so an area that's evolved quite positively, initially it was a bit of a train crash, was the way sports world has tried to embrace NFTs. A lot of it was just sort of dropping their face and names and attaching it to projects and driving influence that way. And then all kinds of disputes came up about naming rights, who's actually allowed to sell projects there. And that's evolved quite quickly now to trying to drive fan engagement there. So it's probably worth having a look there. Trying to think of other projects.
Hey, sure, no, I mean,
getting into trouble, but
that's all right. Siobhan, I mean, what's your perspective on those looking at starting their investment journey? You often work with company business owners and corporate executives who are looking at this in the context of their own business. How do you get them up the curve, and what should they learn?
Well, I mean, I think if you're looking at trying to make money out of NFTs, it's going to be quite tricky. I mean, there are some projects that come out that, they're obviously going to be quite popular. You need to do your research, stay up on influencers in the space. There's a lot of kind of promotion and influencing, as there are with, say, cryptocurrencies, for example, people shilling, etc. So, if you are genuinely interested in it, however, from my perspective, I think if you're going to buy it, think of it as artwork. If that's what you're buying. I mean, there are other projects that you can invest in, and there's other use cases for it. And I think we will see NFTs, they will be attached to many assets, real estate and, even hard. We're dealing with a company at the moment who got gold and silver, selling NFTs where you can take a loan against the amount that you've bought, the NFT that you've bought, again, that's backed with gold and silver. But if it comes down to, if we're talking like artwork, etc., buy what you like. I think that's the point, because trying to divine the future value of an NFT piece, I think is a tricky thing to do.
There's a question from Aline here in the comments, just saying, what is the legal status of physical underlying asset when selling an NFT? I'm not sure the angle of this question is similar to what you just said, Siobhan, about a real estate backed with an NFT. I mean, this world is just, having tokens being launched to fundraise physical assets is a whole new space. But I don't know whether that question's clear enough to give a proper answer to.
I guess it's contractual, and I would definitely pass that over to Lizzie or Fred.
Lizzie or Fred, I mean, Lizzie, perhaps what's your view on, are you seeing perhaps real estate is an area that people are really looking for in this area, aren't they? And, the sale of new property developments and things like that. How have you seen it being used?
Yeah, so there's no reason why in principle you couldn't link to a physical asset rather than a digital asset. What we commonly see is digital assets because it's an online space at first, and this is how it's developed in the context of gaming and artwork, things like that. But in the same way as, we described earlier, the fact that you often link within the token to the asset being somewhere else, whether that's stored in a decentralized way or stored in a server somewhere, for example. In principle, if you describe the asset in the right way, you could link to a physical asset, and precisely the rights that you're going to give will depend on what the code says and what the contract around it says. So it'd have to be pretty bespoke, I think, but there's no reason in principle why you couldn't use the technology to do something more than simply link to a JPEG or another kind of another digital asset. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, Aline, I hope that gets to your question. If not, do follow up on something more specific. Frank Hennessy, thank you, Frank, for your question. Great to have you on board with us today. And I'll put this one to Fred. Now that NFTs are regarded as property, will counterfeiting be open to prosecution? So does that change in status? Will that have an impact for those who are counterfeiting NFTs? Fred, is there a view?
Yeah, I mean, I think it will. This boils down to the same question of IP rights that we've come to time and time again. And I think whilst I've been focusing on art in this talk, there's a lot of media out there for big brands, and they are actively looking to try and enforce, for example, trademarks in the digital world, where perhaps there isn't a precedent to do so. So the recognition as real property, I think, is going to be helpful in that sort of case. In terms of actually counterfeiting an NFT, it's very difficult to protect against that, but where there's a lot of value, I think creators will be looking to enforce those rights.
Terrific. Well, we're out of time. That hour has just flown by. Thank you so much to the panel for contributing. Do follow each of them on social media. And if you have any supplementary questions, do let us know. We'd love to hear from you. But thank you for joining us today.